Welcome to PRAJNA SPARKS, special series 59 Days of Healing, where we explore one maxim from the Tibetan Lojong text, 7 points for healing dualistic mind each day to integrate the practice into our lives. Today is day 57. We're in the midst of point 7 tips. Maxim 57 reads, "Don't be so touchy." This maxim is not saying squash your feelings. Ignore what you're feeling, deny it, turn away from it, bury it. What it's saying is there's no need to have a hair trigger kind of temper, to be very reactive, quick to take offense. Of course, there are times where we may be in a difficult state emotionally and feel very thin-skinned, or we may have areas of great sensitivity because of our past life experiences, trauma, any number of different issues. None of that is what the maxim is talking about. It's talking about just the everyday things that happen all of the time when we get into disagreements or situations that feel unpleasant, and we immediately swing into a storyline, more often than not, getting ourselves off the hook altogether and coming up with and sometimes unusually elaborate explanation for why everything else is at the root of the problem. Now, some of us realize, of course, that we have a role to play, and we might even say, oh yeah, well, I have something to do with it, but we're still being very touchy about it. We're still very offended. We're still running that story in our head over and over and over again. Basically, we're renting out space that could be filled with peace of mind to turbulence. This maxim is asking us to consider that being touchy in general run-of-the-mill circumstances, meaning not ones where we have a significant sensitivity or traumatic history or the like, but just because things just peeve us, is giving dualistic mind more fuel to keep churning, which is exactly that process of disturbing mind's natural tranquility. Then we sit on the meditation cushion and we try to do our practice, and of course we can't, because we've been churning our mind up about this thing for whatever amount of time it's been. The mind doesn't just naturally stop. You've been winding it up, so it's going to keep going. Not being so touchy is about giving us room to contact that space of being tender, open, and vulnerable, and at the same time connecting with an understanding of ourselves, our vulnerability, and our tenderness that actually creates room for a full dimensional picture of what's going on and how we can nurture ourselves and heal from the situation at the same time that we are healing the habit of being in a dualistic match with experience in our mind. Instead of being touchy with experience, ride the waves of experience so that we can connect with what's really happening for us and be very authentic in the ways we respond, instead of touchy and reactive.
There are so many occasions where our buttons get pushed, and it's so easy to be reactive to things. I often talk about this in the work that I do about dialogue across political disagreement, and talk about how to manage emotions so that we can speak from a more grounded place, from a place of regaining our equilibrium. And it's always important for me to make a distinction between that and a sort of tone policing, because people are very concerned about shutting down voices, especially more marginalized voices that are trying to speak out. And sometimes that speaking out can be loud and can be forceful. And one of the ways that I try to do this is by thinking about, okay, I'm not saying don't express what you're feeling in that way because of how that's going to affect the other person. Notice how it's affecting you. I'm hearing a little bit of that in what you're saying in terms of it's going to roil you up, and that there's typically some vulnerability underneath that. And if we can get to a point of touching into that, then we might come from a place where not only can we still be authentic, but also more effective both internally and interpersonally.
The Lojong practice as a whole and any of the maxims are about our inner experience. As I love to say, the Tibetan word for a Buddhist is inwarder. None of this is about how we express. Why is that? Because if we're already turned inward, if we're already being in touch with our own vulnerability, what needs are feeling unmet in us, and what ways are wholesome and valuable strategies for meeting those needs, including sometimes being forceful, then the way we enact that just naturally follows. There doesn't need to be rules about how to enact that if we're at the source. All of the maxims are always trying to turn us inward. What's happening for you that's making this so touchy? Maybe there is a sensitivity, maybe not as strong as a trauma, but the button that's getting pushed. One of the things that can be very helpful is turning inward and identifying, is this reaction something to what's happening in the present moment, or is there some historical stuff getting in there? That can be really helpful for us because I will respond differently to those things. I will care for myself with respect to the historical things without passing it on to whoever's there in the present moment. But of course, that present moment may carry with it some notes of historical, societal issues. If we're talking about concerns with race or other things, there may be some elements in the present moment that need to be addressed. Caring for myself and my own personal history gives me the strength and the clarity to meet the present moment experience in whatever way is appropriate for that moment. Another way to think about it is that the maxim is trying to encourage us not to have this knee-jerk reaction, and instead to be very present and very engaged with our response. This is often more difficult, more uncomfortable, and also more proactive and beneficial.
I always share with people some very practical tools for managing emotions, and I'd like to see how you think these fit with some of the strategies that you might recommend. One of the things is just knowing what happens for us physiologically and in our minds when we're starting to approach that point. So for a lot of people, it's the heart's beating faster, they're feeling flushed, their muscles feel tense. And the sooner we notice that, then the sooner I think we can take some action around that, around dealing with it. In terms of some of the strategies for how we deal with it, breathing is always, I think, a very helpful tool because we're breathing all the time, but the kind of breathing that we can do to help us regain our equilibrium, some slow, deep breathing usually helps with that. Some of the things that we know about dealing with trauma are also helpful in all kinds of situations where our emotions are going somewhere that we don't want them to go. And so even something like physically grounding ourselves by touching our own hand can be useful, or feeling the floor under your feet or the chair under your body. And so some of those kinds of things that are more physically grounding are helpful in the kinds of situations that I work with. And I'm curious about how those kinds of things fit for you.
Sometimes there's a difference in the actual techniques that are used in worldly context as opposed to Dharma context. Sometimes there's a difference in how the techniques are employed or the instructions are given. So what I'm hearing in what you're saying that feels relevant to this practice is a sense of an embodied experience. Buddhist practice is not going to say, learn the ways that you might respond and keep them in your head. That's not about the present moment. That's about a list of things that you have to memorize. The other points that you talk about are rolled together. For example, the difficult situation happens and we immediately fall into our embodied experience. Nothing like the body to get you into the present moment. The body isn't remembering a list of how it's supposed to be feeling when it's triggered. We might feel different ways because of different triggers. And one of the ways might be that we can't remember anything. This is one thing that I always recall from just social settings. In the US, the number to call for emergency is 911. Other countries, it's some other simple thing. Why? Because no matter how much everybody can be asked, what's the number to call for emergency? You say 911. When the emergency happens, people forget. That's one of the common things that happen. But falling into your body in that present moment, you don't need to remember anything. You just stop and feel what you're feeling. When you're doing that, you're naturally going to be breathing with more consciousness, with more awareness, to just tap into the body. And that is also naturally grounding. Our body is fleshy, it's bony, it's sitting on the ground or standing or leaning. It is somehow connected to the earth, whether directly or indirectly. So simply getting into the space of the body's immediate experience has a composite effect that has elements of what you're talking about. From the perspective of Buddhist practice, has immediacy and the ability to just get us into that present moment without, oh my gosh, I can't remember, what was I supposed to do? I'm so stupid. Now, on top of all of the difficulty we're having in a place where we're triggered, we're knocking ourselves for not knowing what to do when we're triggered. We open into self-empathy without calling it that or needing to remember instructions. We can connect with what we're feeling and feel kindly towards that, irrespective of whether anybody else agrees with us. Just dropping everything and falling into the body can put us in touch with the wisdom and the care and the love that our body has for ourselves.
This has been Yeshe and Tanya on day 57 of PRAJNA SPARKS special series, 59 Days of Healing. Tune in daily for more maxims from the Tibetan Lojong text, 7 Points for Healing Dualistic Mind. Check the episode notes for more resources. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at PRAJNA SPARKS, and email us, sparks@prajnafire.com with any questions. May all beings benefit.